My name is Natasha, and I always thought my marriage was normal. After 5 years with Luca, I had learned to recognize his expressions and decipher his silences. We were never a banal couple, of course, but who really is? What happened 2 months ago shattered every certainty, breaking the veil of normality behind which we hid. Luca always treated me with an almost obsessive devotion. He would watch me, studying my every gesture carefully, as if he wanted to imprint every detail into his mind. He was in love with me. I always knew that. But there was something more, something I couldn't grasp. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at me intensely, as if he were waiting for something. At first, I thought it was just his way of being, but then that day changed everything. It was a warm June evening, the sunset painting the sky with hues of red and orange. I was tired after a long day of work and just wanted to relax on the couch with a glass of wine. Luca was already home when I arrived, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of whiskey in his hand. There was a strange tension in the air, something I couldn't quite decipher. "Natasha," he said in a strangely calm voice, almost devoid of emotion, "I have a proposal for you." I sat down across from him, intrigued. Luca was never a man of many words. He preferred action over pointless discussions. But that evening he seemed different, almost detached, as if he were speaking about someone else. "What kind of proposal?" I asked, trying to hide my apprehension. He looked into my eyes with his enigmatic expression. "I want you to betray me," he said, and my heart stopped for a moment. I wasn't sure I had understood him correctly. "Betray you?" I repeated incredulously. "Are you joking?" "No, I'm not joking," he replied with the same icy calm. "I want you to do it in front of me." His words hit me like a slap. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "But why?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why would you want such a thing?" Luca sipped his whiskey slowly, as if carefully considering his response. "It's something I've always wanted," he finally said. "A need of mine, so to speak." I couldn't believe what was happening. I had always thought I knew him, that I understood what went on in his mind. But now I was facing a stranger. "But this is crazy," I exclaimed. "Why should I do it? Don't I love you enough?" "It's not a matter of love," he replied, with an enigmatic smile. "It's a matter of trust. I want to see how far you're willing to go for me." His words took my breath away. Trust? Was this his idea of trust? "I don't understand," I said, shaking my head. "Do you really want me to be with another man in front of you?" "Yes," he replied without hesitation. "And I don't want to force you into anything. I want you to do it only if you truly desire it." I stood up from the chair, confused and furious. "I don't know if I can do something like that," I said, trying to stay calm. "This isn't normal." "I know," he admitted, placing his glass on the table. "But neither has our love ever been normal, don't you think?" Those words stayed with me for days. I was confused, angry, but also curious. What was Luca really seeking? Was it just a perversion, or was there something deeper? I couldn't stop thinking about it, even as I tried to ignore it, to suppress the feeling of unease that consumed me. Weeks went by. Luca Neve R brought up the subject again, but I knew it was there, lingering between us like a ghost. I felt lost, as if my reality had been turned upside down by that one conversation. There was a part of me that was tempted, I admit, a part that wanted to discover how far love could go, or perhaps my husband's madness. Then, one evening, while we were having dinner with friends, Luca made a suggestion. "Why don't we invite Marco and Sarah over for the next weekend?" he said with a smile. "We could have a special evening, something different." Marco was an old friend of ours, one of those charming types who immediately capture attention. I had always been attracted to him, even if I had never admitted it, not even to myself. Sarah was his partner, a beautiful, confident woman who seemed to fear nothing. I accepted the invitation without thinking too much. Maybe I wanted to test Luca's intentions, or maybe I was just curious to see how the situation would unfold. The weekend arrived, bringing with it a palpable tension. I had chosen a tight black dress, perhaps a bit too provocative, but I wanted to feel beautiful, desired. Luca made no comments, but his eyes followed me everywhere. Marco and Sarah arrived on time, bringing a bottle of wine and that unmistakable lively energy of theirs. The evening started normally, with laughter and light conversations, but as time went on, the tension grew. I felt Luca's gaze on me, like a flame burning my skin. I had drunk a bit too much, maybe to calm my nerves, to give myself the courage to face the unknown. And then it happened. Luca stood up, and with a voice that seemed to come from another dimension, said, "Natasha, why don't you show Marco our little secret?" The room suddenly fell silent. Marco looked at me, confused, while Sarah smiled, as if she knew something I didn't. I felt my heart pounding faster and faster, a rush of adrenaline running down my spine. "What are you talking about, Luca?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He came over to me, taking my hand. "It's time, love," he said. "Trust me." I didn't know what to do. I was paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. But something in that moment, perhaps the alcohol or my own curiosity, pushed me to take a step forward. I felt his burning gaze on me. Then the unthinkable happened. Our lips met in a kiss that seemed to blaze with desire and confusion. Marco hesitated for a moment, but then gave in while Sarah watched with a mix of surprise and satisfaction. Luca, meanwhile, remained still, his expression indecipherable. When I pulled away from Marco, the silence was deafening. No one spoke, no one moved. My heart was racing wildly as my brain tried to process what I had just done. I turned to Luca, expecting anger, disappointment, something. But all I saw was a faint, almost satisfied smile. "You see, Natasha," he said in a tone I couldn't decipher. "It wasn't so terrible, was it? Terrible." I didn't even know how to define what I had just experienced. I felt confused, betrayed, but also strangely alive, as if I had just crossed a threshold I didn't even know existed. The evening continued, but nothing was the same. Eventually, Marco and Sarah left, leaving us alone. Luca said nothing, made no comments. He simply kissed me on the forehead before going to bed, as if everything had been normal. But I knew that nothing would ever be normal again. Something had changed, something I could no longer ignore. Days, then weeks passed. Luca never mentioned that night again, and I didn't know how to deal with the emptiness I felt inside. Yet, I found myself thinking about Marco, about that forbidden kiss, about that moment of madness. Perhaps Luca was right. Perhaps there was something deeper at play, something we still had to discover. But one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same. Several weeks passed in a strange calm, a kind of unspoken truce between Luca and me. On one side was the heavy silence of things left unsaid. On the other, an undercurrent of tension and desire. I felt like I was balancing on a thin wire between the normalcy of my everyday life and an abyss of unknown sensations. Marco sent me a message a few days after that evening, a simple "How are you?" Nothing too compromising, but I knew there was much more behind those words. I stared at the phone screen for a few moments, my heart in my throat, my hands slightly trembling. Then, without overthinking it, I replied, "Good, you?" From that moment on, the messages became more frequent. Light conversations at first, an exchange of playful remarks, stories about our days. But beneath the surface was constant tension, an undertone that reminded me continuously of that stolen kiss. Luca seemed unaware, or perhaps he simply didn't care. He continued treating me with his usual kindness, almost with a sense of pride, as if he had won an invisible victory. One night, as I lay in bed next to Luca, my phone vibrated on the nightstand. I looked at the screen. It was Marco. "I need to see you," the message read. Part of me immediately felt guilty, but another part, the part that was growing stronger each day, was curious. I quietly got out of bed, trying not to wake Luca, and walked to the window. I looked out into the dark night, searching for an answer in the streetlights illuminating the road. Then, with my heart pounding, I typed, "Tomorrow." "I need to talk to you," came the reply. A chill ran down my spine. I knew it was a terrible idea, but I couldn't stop myself. "Okay," I replied. The next day, I felt like a thief. Every action seemed loaded with guilt. The way I got ready, the way I looked at Luca during breakfast. He seemed not to notice anything, or maybe he knew and was playing his own game. I often wondered what was going through his mind, but every time I tried to read something in his eyes, I found only that inscrutable smile. As I left the house, I told Luca I was meeting a friend for coffee. He looked at me with a hint of doubt, but said nothing, simply nodded as if everything was perfectly normal. And I felt foolish, like a child lying for the first time. I arrived at the cafe where we had arranged to meet. It was a small place hidden in a side street, with dim lights and soft jazz music playing in the background. Marco was already there, sitting at a table in the corner. When he saw me, he stood up and smiled, a smile that seemed filled with nervousness. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat down. "I don't know why I'm here," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Yes, you do," he replied, and his eyes gleamed with an intensity that made me shiver. There's something between us, something we can't ignore. I couldn't deny it. There was something, a palpable tension, that made me feel alive and confused at the same time. "But Luca," I began, but he interrupted me. "Luca already knows everything, Natasha," Marco said firmly. "He wanted this, didn't he?" I was speechless. "What do you mean?" I asked, a pang of panic tightening my chest. Marco leaned in closer, lowering his voice as if revealing a secret. Luca spoke to me before that night. He asked if I would be willing to participate, and I agreed. My world shattered at that moment. Luca had orchestrated everything. He had been pulling the strings, manipulating everything like a puppeteer, and I had naively played my part without realizing it. "Why," I whispered, feeling the tears burn behind my eyes. "Why do something like this?" Marco took my hand. "Because he wants you to discover something about yourself," he said gently. "Something you might be afraid to admit." His hand was warm and strong, and for a moment I felt safe. But then reality hit like a punch to the stomach. I stood up abruptly, pulling my hand away. "I don't know what you're trying to tell me, but I can't do this," I said, my voice trembling. Marco made no move to stop me. He just looked at me with those piercing eyes, full of something I couldn't decipher. "Natasha, think about it," he said. "This could be the start of something real, something true. Don't close that door." But for me, the door already seemed closed. I returned home with a heavy heart and a head full of questions. When Luca saw me, his smile was calm, serene. "How was coffee with your friend?" he asked, in a tone that seemed innocent. "It was interesting," I replied, trying to hide the turmoil inside me. He nodded as if he already knew the answer. I moved closer to him, trying to understand. "Why did you do it?" I asked softly. Luca looked into my eyes, and for the first time, I saw a vulnerability I had never noticed before. "Because I want you to be free, Natasha," he said. "Free to choose, free to understand who you really are, without fear, without limits." I felt overwhelmed by a wave of conflicting emotions, anger and a sense of betrayal on one side, a spark of understanding and awareness on the other. Maybe Luca was right. Maybe there was a truth in all of this that I had never wanted to face. And so that night, as he slept, I watched him for a long time, wondering if I was truly ready to discover who I was, even if it meant losing everything I knew. But perhaps in that moment, I had already started to change, and my life from that point on would never be the same. The story has ended, but if you want to hear more Confessioni Intime, click on one of the videos you see on the screen, and remember to subscribe to the channel for new intriguing stories every day.